Testing again, testing. Good morning. Working. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming into our next big thing talk. I am Jennifer Riley. I'm from Design Interactive. We're headquartered right here in Orlando, Florida. Do a lot in the area of XR and training, so very excited to have you here for this session. I do want to make a small little logistical change. If anybody's willing to come into the middle, the open seats in the middle and at the tables, I hear the chairs are very comfortable. So if you want to join me in the center, I see some people moving. Awesome. Thank you. And before we get started, I want to move forward a little bit. Let's try to click over here, see if that works. There we are. So this is our session. One more. Nope, there was I'm going to leave it there, but there was a slide, I thought, to thank our sponsors. It's not there, but I want to take some time to thank them. Appreciate that. There it is. So sponsors on the screen, let's give them a little round of applause for helping us out today. Very exciting to have these sponsors. This session, I sat in on the next session. These sessions have been very engaging, very exciting. So we really appreciate the opportunity that they have given us to do these next big thing talks, okay? We have an exciting set of speakers here today to talk about beyond the hype, really the perspectives in using XR and the Metaverse for training. When I think about this topic, it actually takes me back to some work I did a number of years ago. It was about 2002, 2003, and we were doing some work at Fort Benning. And it was to evaluate the capacity to use collaborative virtual environments to train things like decision-making and situational awareness, complex cognitive skills. It was a relatively simple setup, back projection screen, but the squad, which was an active duty squad, they had trained together. They could communicate, they could shoot and move, kind of train as you fight. And it was pretty good, except that they kind of thought the setup was kind of hokey, right? So back projection screen in the cell, they did have an avatar, wasn't super heavy on the graphics as compared to some of their VR and the video games that they had done, but we were able to show them in playback of that setting clear breakdowns in communication, clear breakdowns in situational awareness, using objective data, clear breakdowns in protocol. And the first squad that came through kind of took it as a game, showed them the data, and then the squad leader asked me very politely to leave the room so that he could have a discussion. They had a very loud conversation, and after they came back, that sort of hokey game actually turned into training. So what was not very engaging for them initially, when we were able to show the kinds of integrated, communicative, collaborative training that could take place in that space, it turned into training. That was one of the experiences that I've had across the course of my career that really has demonstrated the power of synthetic training, what we can achieve with the Metaverse and XR. So we're excited to have your speakers here today. We have 4 groups, or speaker groups. Daniel Robinson, we have Dr. Peter Squire, Major Johnson, and then Mr. Garza and Mr. Reese, who are going to talk to you about how we're bringing the Metaverse out of science fiction into reality, speaking about some challenges, but also the successes that they're seeing, clear successes that they're seeing in using these technologies and capacities across the military training. So I'm going to do the first introduction. It is Mr. Daniel Robinson. He's going to open us up today. He is founder and chief executive officer of Red 6, a revolutionary firm that is at the forefront of synthetic air combat training. Robinson hails from England and served in the Royal Air Force as a Tornado F-3 pilot. After completing weapons instructor course, he was the equivalent, which is the equivalent of the UK US Air Force Weapons School. He's the first foreign national to fly the F-22 Raptor. He has an MBA from Georgetown University. He's an award-winning CEO, the 2015 UK CEO of the Year. He founded Red 6 in 2018, and they have revolutionized training with Carbon, their first outdoor synthetic training environment that enables within visual range maneuvering. Using a combination of AR and artificial intelligence, Carbon allows real pilots in real airplanes to visually fly against synthetic threats. Join me in welcoming Mr. Robinson to the stage.
Great, thanks. All right, you guys hear me? Okay? Yes, perfect. Awesome, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I was told I'm not allowed to talk about Red 6 today, but you did a great job of it, so thank you. That sets the stage for me, so I really appreciate that. I can't see the slides, so I'm gonna click this. There we go. Okay, you got my background, so you understand the context I'm coming at this from. I am the CEO and founder of Red 6. However, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a warfighter, and it's something that I care about passionately, because when I was flying Raptors and flying Tornadoes, I couldn't get training. It sucked, and it's only gotten a whole bunch worse since then. So my job today is to kind of frame the overall view of why the metaverse, why XR, AR, VR, whatever you want to call it, why it's important to you, and then we've got some esteemed speakers that are going to come behind me and talk way more intelligent than I'm sure I am. But let's start by doing a poll. Show of hands, please. Who knows what the metaverse is? That's gutsy. I will cold call. Okay. That's good. So I would imagine, let's say there's 300 people in this room. I would imagine that of the 300 people in this room, if I asked any one of you to give a definition of what the metaverse is, we'd get 300 different answers. So I think it's important from a starting point that we give ourselves a common language to work from. I can tell you what the metaverse is not. The metaverse is not augmented reality. It is not virtual reality. It's not mixed reality. That is a means of consuming data inside the metaverse. But let's talk about architecturally from the metaverse. There are some key constituent parts that architecturally will make up a metaverse that I think we could probably all agree upon. It is a combination of hardware, software, compute, data, protocols, APIs, gateways, and assets which will be virtual and augmented in nature that we can manipulate the data from through consuming it in AR and VR. And if we can agree with that consensus, one key criteria of that data that is actionable is that the data has to be actionable. And it has to be actionable because the metaverse has to have utility. It has to do something. It has to provide a service. The general consensus of which I subscribe to is that the metaverse will become the world's next great labor platform. But for it to become the next great labor platform in the world, which I do believe will happen, it has to be ubiquitous in nature. And for it to be ubiquitous in nature, it means it has to be mobile, which means it has to come with us wherever we are. And so it's for this reason that I think the future of the metaverse lies inside of augmented reality, not virtual reality. Now, we can argue this in the bar all day long. I'm happy to do that offline. But today, I'm really going to focus on the advent of augmented reality. But because for it to come with us wherever we are, augmented reality is the technology that will underpin this. So let's give ourselves a common definition from which we can work from in terms of the metaverse. I think the metaverse is a ubiquitous layer of data and metadata that will come with us wherever we are. And it has to satisfy three criteria. It has to offer continuity of experience. Therefore, it has to be both synchronous and persistent to the real world. If we step inside of it or we come out of it, it has to make sense to us from that perspective. But I think critically, in terms of the data inside of the metaverse, the data inside of the metaverse has to be actionable. And if we action that data inside of the metaverse, it has to have consequences to both our digital lives and our real lives. If it does not, I would argue it's just a video game. Now, the first example I saw of this was actually by my co-founder, Glenn Snyder. Is Glenn in the audience today or not? He's not. Well, Glenn, co-founder of Red 6, I do a lot of the talking. Glenn is the brains of the organization. And in 2015, Glenn took 2 race cars, put them on 2 separate racetracks in different locations. And actually, one was in the UK, one was in the US. He put real race car drivers into those cars and created a virtual reality world in which connected the drivers together, and they were able to race real race cars blind to the outside world. And when I saw that, I understood that not only was Glenn connecting them together in a digital world, but there were real-world ramifications of the actions and decisions they took in the digital world. You can ask Glenn, they crashed the cars a bunch of times. They were racing real cars around real tracks in VR. And when I saw that, I really started to understand what it was to be inside a metaverse and to have consequences in both realms. And that's a really critically important point because it got us thinking in 2017 about the utilization of the metaverse to transform military flight training. Now, I do not argue there are many constituent parts of the metaverse. No one individual company owns it. There's tons of places to play. We've all got a role to play inside the metaverse. I like big levers. And the biggest levers, as far as I can see, in terms of what we're doing with the military metaverse and training, is to tackle flight training. And the biggest lever of all is how we think about flying and interacting in airplanes. So I'm going to focus on that. Does this work? You should see 2 graphs up there. You guys see them? Okay, great. I'm going to summarize those graphs for you really quickly. It's a horrible story. We, as the United States and allied nations, are not ready to prevail in a peer conflict around the world. Now, you can read that, but in essence, I'll summarize it is we're not ready because we can't retain people, we can't produce people, we can't train them effectively, And there's a dearth of capability in the Combat Air Force right now, both at the tactical level and how we actually produce pilots through the training system. You can see if you read the graph to the right, expanding out to the future, we will never be able to solve that demand signal. The fundamentals of a massive demand signal and a chronic undersupply, to me, equals market opportunity. So what are we talking about here? To understand this, let's go back in time to Gulf War I. In 1991, the United States had 134 frontline combat squadrons. Average age of an airplane in Gulf War I was about 9.7 years old, and on average, pilots were getting 23 hours of training every single month. I can tell you when I hit the front line shortly before 9/11 in 2001, I was getting about 25 to 30 hours of flying training every month. We could only dream of that today. Since 91, so in 1991, we enjoyed absolutely supreme conventional overmatch of any peer adversary. In fact, a peer adversary didn't exist for us. But we enjoyed massive overmatch in terms of capability. Now, since that time, we have slowly but surely atrophied in capability. Fast forward to today, we've got 57 frontline combat squadrons right now. Average age of an airplane is a smidge under 29 years old. And guess what? Pilots on average are getting about 6.7 flying hours a month. And all of that is not blue air. A lot of that is red air as well. So it's a much more dire picture than that. I say all of that because we are incurring a tremendous amount of strategic risk. Whilst we've been doing that, two things have happened on the world stage. You've seen the reemergence of Russia onto the world stage as a state actor with nefarious intent, and we've seen that to terrible effect in Ukraine, although the reality of the rhetoric coming out of Russia in terms of its defense industrial base and the reality of it is fundamentally different. But let's not take our eye off the ball, and let's speak plainly. The peer threat to us is China, and let's be more specific, it's the CCP. And in China, we've seen a long-term geopolitical strategy aligned to a systematic mobilization of a defense industrial base. That has been facilitated by a smidge over 9% on average GDP growth year on year since 1989. And central to that mobilization of a defense industrial base is innovation. Now, innovation happens through a number of ways, through indigenous innovation, IP theft, foreign direct investment in our technologies and companies, espionage. It doesn't matter how it happens, but it's happening. Case in point, 2017, the Chinese J-20 arrived on the scene. In 2018, the PL-15 air-to-air missile, which is a direct threat to us and competes with advanced missiles on this side of the ocean. And I say all of that now because we accept that we are incurring strategic risk, and that strategic risk is getting greater and greater and greater. The question is, what do we do about it? So I'm going to be bold here and say the definition of insanity, ladies and gentlemen, is repeating the same things time after time and expecting different results. We are not going to solve the training crisis or production of pilots by smashing our heads against a brick wall and trying to do it with physical assets. We can't do it indigenously. We can't do it with red air private contractors. That's a temporary band-aid at best. It's not scalable, and it's not relevant. And although collaborative combat aircraft are really interesting, I'm going to talk about them here in a second, I don't believe that's a solution either. The solution, as per you can see on the graph, lies inside the LVC ecosystem, and I put it to you that it's actually in the metaverse and mixed reality that we'll find our salvation and our way out of the hole that we're in right now. So let's talk about the vision of what we are set out to do in my company. My vision was to create a joint augmented battle space in which all warfighters across all domains will eventually connect together in a joint synthetic training environment. That's our North Star. That's where we're headed to. But we're going to focus on the domain of air for now, because obviously it's the closest crocodile to our canoe, and it's what we know and love. Excuse me one second. Now, I'm not a genius, but when you look at that graph and you look at LVC, you start to see that LVC is inevitable, right? But the problem with LVC, as I looked at it, was LVC is a 50% solution. Why is it a 50% solution? Because it works in the beyond visual range environment only, but the moment that fighter pilots get to within visual range, the whole ecosystem collapses. Why is that? Because the moment I go from three-dimensional chess player looking down at my radar scope, etc., to looking out of the window, I'm putting the proverbial gum shield in and going for a fist fight, and I'm doing the visual maneuvering, the whole ecosystem collapses. Why is that? Because there's no way of synthetically putting synthetic entities into the field of view of the pilots and having them act and behave in a manner commensurate with real airplanes. Well, there is now, and that's the core technology that we set out to solve inside of Red 6. And we did that because I want to complete that LVC ecosystem. Because the LVC ecosystem at scale is the only way we are going to solve the training crisis of the future. Now, it's very easy to get wrapped around the axle of this is just a within visual range thing, and to do that is to miss the point. We can today take off in real airplanes, go up and fly against Chinese J-20s. We can do ACM with virtual wingmen, 2 virtual airplanes flying against us. Not only that, we can penetrate airspace and physically see surface-to-air missiles coming up at us. And historically, we've never been able to train to that. We can do that right now. It's all great training value. But to focus on the tactical level use cases of the technology is to fundamentally miss the point. And the point here is this technology not only works at the tactical within visual range piece, but it is the key enabling technology, the Metaverse, XR, whatever you want to call it, for the broader LVC ecosystem. And it's really important that we understand that. Let me talk about the Metaverse at large. Now, I said in the definition of the Metaverse earlier on in the conversation, it has to be persistent, synchronous with real life, and continuous in nature. Well, when I started thinking about that, one of the things I always lamented in terms of fast jet or combat training is we'll go to Nellis Air Force Base at Red Flag or ME supports, best training in the world. And we'll fly our combat missions day on day, and we'll go fly a mission, we'll land, we'll debrief that mission. That's not how we fight. When we fight, we go out on night 1 of the war and we exert effect, both kinetic and non-kinetic effect. We come down from that mission, we debrief the outcomes of that mission, and then we roll into day 2. And day 2 wave goes, but the day 2 wave inherits the outcomes of night 1 of the war. And you probably know where I'm going with this right now. What the Metaverse allows us to do now is conduct what I refer to as campaign-level training. So if we can create a living, breathing world outside that gives us the benefits of flying real airplanes in a synthetic world, but we can have that world react to us, be it through AI or human input through white forces in terms of controlling the red air, then the idea of campaign-level training over multiple weeks allows us to do some really interesting theater-level campaigning. And we're able to connect decision makers from the tactical operator beyond the front line all the way up through the National Command Authority to the President himself. So you think about that in the context of the Metaverse, it starts to usher in some really transformational ways in terms we think about training. I did touch upon CCA, Collaborative Combat Aircraft, and I want to tip my hat to this technology because it's really interesting, I think really important to what we're doing in the future, certainly in terms of operations. It is inevitable that we'll be working in conjunction with CCA. However, I think it forms a smaller part of the overall training solution for how we think about the future of adversary aircraft. I say that because it's not scalable. It's going to be expensive to do it. We're not going to be wanting to fly them every week or every day, certainly, because in the same way we don't want to fly missiles every day, we don't want to be beating up our assets. So let's dig into what is CCA. What is a CCA, an unmanned aerial vehicle? Well, yes, it's a chunk of aluminum, it's a chunk of metal, it's a composite flying through the sky. It has a form factor, it has a kinetic and non-kinetic capability. I get that. There's many versions of it, and some great stuff out there. It's really important. But what is sitting at the heart of that? 2 things as far as I can tell. One is an AI algorithm that controls that entity, and the other is the UX UI that allows it to interact with manned cockpits. And those things are critically important for us to get right. And fundamental to working with AI from a manned perspective is understanding that it is predictable and allowing us to build trust in those AI algorithms so we know what it's going to do at any one point in time. That inevitably incurs a bunch of risk. Well, what's a great way to think about that risk and managing it and circumventing the problems of having to fly the assets every day? I go back to the Metaverse and the use of augmented reality in conjunction with CCA. So I'm going to put a concept up here that I think is the future of how we will inevitably train. And I'm going to span from LVC to LVC3A. But if we start pulling this apart, live, virtual, constructive, collaborative combat aircraft, I think that mixed solution is how we think about the future of adversary training, LVC3A. But start pulling that apart. And even if I concede the point that live flying, there will be an element of live flying in terms of provisions of adversaries later as we go through the next 10 years, which I don't think it's actually going to be necessary at all, but I'll concede the point for now. VC and the collaborative combat aircraft, as I've alluded to, all of them are dependent on the ability to use XR and AR in the context of an LVC Metaverse type scenario. We have to be connected together. We have to be able to visualize it. In the future, I see that L there. The future I see is an L where the only air sorties we're flying is blue air. And I don't think it's as far away as people realize. That's what this technology can usher in. I would like a show of hands again, if I may. Who in the audience considers themselves to be innovators? Just one person at the back who works for me. Okay, great. Just one person. Okay, who thinks they are early adopters of technology? Okay, more. Okay, this is about right. So in 1962, Professor Everett Rogers wrote something called the diffusion of innovation theory. And the diffusion of innovation theory states that across a standard distribution or normal distribution, 2.5% of people in this audience will be innovators. Right. It also goes on to say that about 13.5% will be early adopters of the technology. Those are the people that stand in the rain to get an iPhone a week before anyone else. Unfortunately for me, 68% of this audience think I'm full of it right now. And that's normal. That's the frozen middle, right? That's what we're talking about. And it's the normal course of any technology when it comes into service and you're just trying to disrupt. It also tells us that I have about 10% of this audience bought into what I'm talking about right now. You guys believe me. And the tipping point for the adoption of technology in any industry sits at around 15 to 18%. So it became readily apparent to me in the early life cycle of Red 6 that actually we need to make that 8% believe. And as I started thinking about that in the grand tactical context of flying training, it became readily apparent to me that this technology has a massive role to play in the production of pilots. All the way down the training pipeline from day one, walking through the door, how do we fly patterns around airfields, all the way through formation flying, BFM, air combat maneuvering, air-to-air refueling. There is a massive application for this technology to transform the pilot production pipeline, if we are innovative. But to be innovative, guys, one of the things I've learned over the last 5 years leading this company is we are heavily dependent on internal evangelists. Internal evangelists, you're all our stakeholders, right? I'm gonna assume that you're here listening to this because you like XR and AR and the metaverse and you believe there's a future in it. But we collectively have to be internal evangelists in whichever organizations we are privy to, be it the Air Force, the Navy, OEMs, industry at large. It is essential. And you can make a difference. We collectively can make a difference. I'd like to point out two specific examples of this that come from the most unlikely of sources. Yesterday, you may have seen the announcement that we made a deal with BAE Systems to integrate this technology into Hawk. That's a big deal for us. BAE pulled that together inside a year. But I want to make a special thanks and a special nod to the team of Boeing. Are there any Boeing people in here at all? Not one. Awesome. I'm not getting any praise. So Boeing went from 0 to 6 months. 0 to 6 months of coming to fly our technology, and because of 3 or 4 people inside that organization, drove that forward at such a furious pace that last week we signed a contract with Boeing to start integration into AT4 ahead of T7. It can happen that quickly. Internal evangelists sit in amongst us. You guys are really important to the success and adoption of this technology. I'm going to show you a video here in a second. Boeing gets it, I believe. Is there a video, Georgie? Have we got sound on the video, guys? This is way better with sound. Sound people at the back? I imagine there's a really cool soundtrack. There we go.
Okay, Bravo's visual, we're starting to close. Heading about 200. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
we think that's a vision of the future and how we will train and prepare for the next big fight. I will leave you guys with these statistics. This technology at scale adopted across the US Air Force will save us $13 billion a year, 140,000 unnecessary flight hours, and about 140 million pounds of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere. It also has the ability to fundamentally transform the training pipeline and actually quantifiably usher in a new paradigm in how we think about training. I will leave you with one final thought. The definition of insanity is to repeat the same mistake and expect different results. So to the United States Air Force, United States Navy, my beloved Royal Air Force, ATC, ACC, I implore you to wake up and understand what this technology can do for you. LVC is the future, the military metaverse is the future, and XR and AR are a critical technology to enabling that. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Slight mic problem. We'll move ahead with it in the hand. Let's give Dan another round of applause. I want to thank him for opening us up with that motivating speech, and to let us, remind us that a lot of times we think the metaverse is about immersion, increasing immersion, but it's about more than that. It's about interaction, persistent and effective interfacing. It's about adaptive, effective training through personalization, adaptation, and we can achieve those things. And it's to get ultimately to maximized operational impact.